I know I've been real critical of Trent Balky, but two things can be true at once. A new coach will help some of these young players. I'll tell you which ones I'm talking about here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You got that right. It is your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. We thank you for making us your first listen. If you're watching, we appreciate it. Make sure wherever you watch your podcast, you watch Locked On Jaguars each and every day. And if you listen to your podcast, make sure you check out Locked On Jaguars wherever you hear or listen to your podcast. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Shout out to the everydayers for joining us here. And if it's your first time on the show, we thank you for joining us. Hopefully, you'll enjoy it because here's what it's going to be about. From bad to the playoffs. Can it possibly happen? If you look in the NFC right now, that's exactly what happened. Washington was terrible last year. They are in the playoffs. I think the Jaguar fans are looking for some optimism and hope that that could possibly happen to them in 2025. Hopefuls for 2025. I'm talking about young players and maybe some guys that aren't so young that will actually benefit from having a new coach, which is where we'll start at the very top, how new coaches impact young players. When I said two things can be right at once, I absolutely meant that. The thing is y'all know I'm on record. I absolutely wanted the Jacksonville Jaguars to start completely over because what I thought it would do was eliminate the chance that they got into the whole finger pointing deal and where Shah Khan had to absolutely make a choice. Was this more Trent Balky's fault or was this more of Doug Peterson? I'm on record as saying that I think there's enough blame to go around everywhere for when a team underachieves and is as bad as the Jaguars were this past season. So let that be known. I am a firm believer in that. However, at least as of today, Trent Balky is still the GM and he's going to be the GM. That doesn't mean the team isn't going to not necessarily change courses, but it doesn't mean that the team will not hire someone that may have a little bit more cachet and a little bit more say. It doesn't mean that the coach won't have a little bit more power. It just means as of right now, Trent Balky is, along with Shah Khan, leading the search for a new coach. So he is still in a position of authority. And until he isn't, I'm just going to assume that he's going to be the guy pulling the strings when it comes to hiring a coach, getting these draft choices, and whatever free agents they go out and obtain. Now, that means that some incumbent players, especially if Trent is still there, and he believed that those players, that the best of those guys was not extracted by the last coaching staff, and their talents were not maximized. I actually believe that. Yeah, y'all got it. I actually believe it. I believe it for a number of reasons. One, I believe that, and this is just my guess, and this is based on how they employed, all of their assets last year, and this is their game plan. Press Taylor and Doug Peterson couldn't be as bad as it looks like. The optics make it appear that these guys were absolutely horrific at figuring out which guys that they needed to go to the most. I know on defense, Ryan Nielsen looked like he had a hard time doing it because half the time the people that you thought should have been in the game were on the sideline, and it bewildered me. But it got to a point where early in the year, and I keep bringing this up for a reason, because I think it was a sign of something very, very bad. The Jaguars go up 17-7 against the Dolphins at halftime. Y'all have heard me tell this story. They came out, and the significance of that was they were up 14-7, and they got a field goal. They drove the length of the field with like 50 a minute, like maybe 50 some odd seconds or a minute left. And it brought me back to Doug Marrone in the AFC title game against the Patriots where he knelt on the ball. And he didn't do that with 2 timeouts. He was on the 35-yard line, and he decided to just take it inside. And to me, it looked quittish. Is that a word? Quittish? Or quittery, whatever you want to say. It looked like scare money. Doug Peterson actually in his book said something to the point of he couldn't believe that they did that. So when he did that against Miami, I was like, yeah, that's aggression. Now you're going to come out. You gave them points. They walked off with a field goal. They got momentum. Now they need to come out. If they score again, man, it's going to be a wrap. And they almost did. They almost did actually score the second time they got the ball, and ETN fumbled as he was running in for a touchdown. But what occurred to me was the first 2 plays of the second half, they went 3 and out now, by the way, on this first drive. The first 2 players to touch the ball were Tank Bigsby and Parker Washington. See, for me, that's problematic. And it was problematic then, and it turned out to be something that they kept doing. It just seemed like to me they were calling plays over players. You have to identify who your best guys are. Sometimes it's the dudes that you pay a bunch of money. Sometimes it's not. But whatever you do, you can't just have 7, 8 different people touching the ball on one drive. I just think you're not that good to be able to do that, right? So there were some things that Doug Peterson did. I think he did it because they were married to plays and not players. And then I also believe that he did certain things because there were certain players that he absolutely did not believe in, or there were players that he had too much faith in. And Trent Balky may have been right. And then in Doug's, the way he would talk at press conferences, everybody did a nice job. There just did not seem to be consequences for bad things. There just did not seem to be this internal motivation other than playing for pride and being nice about it. I like pressure put on people because it's either going to make you're either going to buckle, and if you buckle under the pressure, you would have buckled under the pressure anyway, or it's going to make you play harder. So I do believe a new coach with a new approach, we don't take anything for granted. The best guys are going to play. If we're paying you a lot of money, I have high expectations of you, and to whom much is given, much is required. I'm a believer in all of those old school things. And there are certain players on this team that will naturally get better when they get a new coach. It's like a player going to another situation and he gets better, i.e., the Van Ginkel kid that went up to Minnesota to go play for Brian Flores, who he was familiar with, obviously, for Miami, got better when he went to a different situation. There have been a number of players. It seems like the Jaguars always sign guys that get worse when they get here. Eric Armstead, Gabe Davis. But a few years ago, you did see where they did get better when they went out and got a wide receiver. And, you know, the Jaguars have had a few situations, like with the Christian Kirk situation, like with the Evan Ingram situation, where they were absolutely more productive when they became Jacksonville Jaguars under new staff. But we're mainly talking about guys that have a chance to actually improve, not just with the presence of any new coach, but with a coach that really, really has a good assistance and they have a good program that can really tap into the potential. So I'm going to mention some young guys. I'm also going to talk about some guys I don't have a whole lot of faith in, and I hope I'm wrong about. We're going to do that here today as we move forward on Locked On Jaguars. So young players and then some other players and hopefuls for 2025 that I believe that with a new coaching staff can improve and give you more than what you've seen under the previous administration. We'll do that. We'll talk about that. We'll do it here in segment number 2 on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you in part by FanDuel. That is correct, man. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. Now, the FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. I know when Saquon Barkley slid down last week, it disappointed a lot of y'all, but don't worry about it. Don't let it come down to the last place. When you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs. FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, moving along here on Locked On Jaguars, where it is your team every day. We always thank you for making us your first listen. Let's talk about some people that I hope are affected by the new coach and the new coaching staff. I know it takes more than a new attitude. It takes more than bringing a whole bunch of people in. This is not a situation where you have to have a complete roster turnover, but it is a situation where I think a new coach is going to come in here and demand that everybody be on their P's and Q's, and then find a way to use the skill set of the players that you have to benefit the team with the most. To benefit the team the most. We're going to start on offense. On offense, I think Anton Harrison, the right tackle, is somebody that I believe that a different coach with a little bit of a different attitude can help. He didn't take that step that I anticipated him taking, but he has a bunch of talent. He's a first-round guy, played really, really well as a rookie, got thrown into the fire, was banged up his rookie year, and you didn't hear him complain one time. And that's the kind of toughness that you can't really qualify or quantify how important that is. And I'm sure we always use Dan Campbell here as the example. I'm sure Dan Campbell would really love and appreciate a guy just like that. Now, I always thought that maybe he needs to move over to left tackle, but now he's been 2 seasons at right tackle, and they have extended at about a clip of $15 million per year to Walker Little. Walker Little is a dude that I'm not as optimistic on, but I will tell you this: he is not as bad as maybe I or some other people have thought that he would be. One of the reasons that we thought that is because the Jaguars kept drafting over him. Guys who needed to be successful, guys who needed to win games. They drafted Anton Harrison. They extended Cam Robinson. And, it's just like, are y'all going to play the dude? So halfway through his final year of his contract, and the Jaguars were not a team that has done a lot of, under Trent Balky at least, they haven't done a lot of extensions during the season. They've given him extension. I thought they were going to let him walk, but they retained him, right? And I do believe it's twofold. One, you ain't going to find the kind of left tackle I'm talking about in free agency. And then the other reason is he is an ascending young player. Maybe he's ascending, and maybe they're thinking a new coach can help him. But he's good enough, and good enough, a big body, a developmental guy. You kind of keep him around, right? And sometimes you just got to pay. It's almost like playing poker. If somebody will raise you. You want to see that next card, you got to pay for it, right? So this is the time. This is the river, man, in terms of you either going to pay him or you're not, and he's going to hit free agency and somebody's going to outprice you. And the Jaguars have seen that before with Jawan Taylor. Those people got buyer's remorse with Jawan Taylor right now. But I tell you what, they didn't have it the first 2 years when they went out and won those championships. But the thing is you have to make that decision. Now, they retained Walker Little at a clip that is, while it's not backbreaking for a franchise, it does indicate that he's going to be a starter. He makes too much money to be a swing guy, right? I think they gave up on the whole guard situation with him. So if you talk about the Jaguars improving their offensive line, it's going to have to require guys to play better. I think Walker Little has been given 4 years to show you what he can do, and what he can do is not as bad as what we thought. But still, I don't think there's as much blue sky with him as opposed to Anton Harrison, who I think has the ability to probably be an all-pro one day if he's able to put everything together. But the Jaguars have to win, too, for these guys to get recognized. On defense, I think that guy is Mason Smith. I think people are praying that Mason Smith, who has a Chris Jones-type physique, can turn out to be a really, really good interior defensive lineman. He's shown he can get some pressure. He's like 2 years removed from a really, really bad injury in college. He was a big-time recruit. He played in the SEC. He looked like every bit of a top 10 pick before he got injured. Hopefully, he can get back to being on track to where he's tracking towards that. Coaches love big people, and I think having him, if he can develop, all of this talk about moving Trayvon inside goes away, because what Mason Smith is not is a nose tackle. Mason Smith is a 3 technique. And with Eric Armstead already saying that he's moving back inside, well, there you go, 1 and 2 with your 3 techniques. Unless you get somebody in here that doesn't need that 1 or that 0 in front of that center, and they want 2 guys that can just 2 gap, and they're going to start splitting the difference. Because there are a lot of teams around the league that don't have a traditional nose tackle. They just have 2 big old dudes that take, the brunt of the responsibility of helping stop the run. And they're 3 down players. He can actually really, really help. Now, I don't know what he needs to do. I don't know if it's lower body strength. I don't know if it's up top. I think the experience helped with him. But he has an immense amount of talent and size at that position to really, really move forward. Now, some other guys that I'm going to name, I think they're good players already, but I still believe that there's more meat on that bone, man. Jarion Jones is one of them. I think Jarion Jones has sort of replaced Antonio Johnson as that dude that I believe moving forward can really be a serious asset. Darnell Savage is an older player. I think Jarion Jones, by the way, is your starting nickel, unless they, go out and say they get Byron Murphy or something. And I think Byron Murphy can play outside. That, by the way, when it comes to free agents, and I'll probably hit this tomorrow, there was some talk yesterday with my friend Jeff Lagerman, some comments he made about Tyson Campbell not being a great player. You can get by with 2 really good players and not have a great player at cornerback. I had somebody tell me once before about picking corners in the top 5. It's like, you don't really need to do that, and then you're going to have to pay the dude a few years later. You can kind of get by with people that are making a little bit less. This is something I heard when they were trading Jalen Ramsey. So you get Tyson Campbell on one side, you get a guy like Byron Murphy where you're not paying him as much as Tyson Campbell, but you're giving him decent money. Then you plug in Jarion Jones on a rookie deal at the nickel, and now I think you're set. That would mean Darnell Savage has to play better at safety. And that is something that's a little bit of a concern to me. Now, switching it back to offense, Trevor Lawrence. Trevor, I think, is a prime candidate to improve, but a part of that improvement is the team will get better, right? They'll probably be more run reliant if they're able to fix their offensive line. They'll streamline all of the dudes that he's going to throw the ball to. You need to your first look is Brian Thomas Jr. If Evan Ingram is healthy, that's another look. And obviously, whoever's going to be the number 2 receiver, whether they go out and get somebody, whether they draft somebody. I just want maybe to reduce all of the different options that he has, but make the options that he has better. Like, this doesn't depend on trickery. This doesn't depend on scheme. This just depends on your guys just being better than everybody else. And then the opponent, doing every single thing that they can to stop Brian Thomas Jr. And when you do that, you open things up for everybody else in the passing game. And you also create avenues and windows for you to be able to run the ball if the guys up front can block people. So those are the players. Those are the players, mainly Mason Smith, Anton Harrison, that I believe have a chance to take another step. And then some veteran players, Trevor Lawrence, Darnell Savage, guys that they have under contract that they're paying a lot of money, to be able to extract and get the absolute most out of them. If Mason Smith turns out to be a very, very good player who plays 70% of the snaps or 75% of the snaps, and he gets 7 sacks to go along with those 2 defensive ends, man, that makes a whole world of a difference, because now you can put that thing together next to him and figure it out. And now you want to start rotating. Okay, you bring Eric Armstead in and you take Trayvon out, or you take Mason Smith out. It gives you the flexibility. I do believe you need 8 defensive linemen. I just don't believe you need to make them all high-priced free agents or high draft choices. So we had that discussion yesterday about Abdul Carter, who I don't think Trent Balky is ever going to draft. Even though he has long arms for a dude that's 6'3", he just seems like a little bit undersized to me for Trent Balky's liking. But I do believe in a rotation system. I just don't believe you need to throw and allocate all of that money to one position, because You don't, it's almost like the little graph that you see sometimes on social media. They have a $1 column, a $2, $3, $4, and $5. That's really how the NFL is. Or you end up like Dallas. You know, you can have 4 or 5 dudes making $120 million a year. And now you better draft well. You better draft well, and you better team build well if you want to win games. Because if you're very, very top heavy like that, money wise, some teams are top heavy, but they're getting a lot of play from young guys on their first contract. You kind of got to balance that a little bit. And I think if the Jaguars can focus on getting a lot out of the dudes they already have on contract, it will really, really help this team and the new coach moving forward. Can the Jaguars go from bad to playoffs? Can they go from a 4-win team to a team that wins a whole bunch of games? I'll tell you my answer in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. All right, today's show is sponsored in part and brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. I have done it, man. I have grown a couple of small businesses, and in 2025, it comes down to how well you can hire. It's all about people, and let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. It's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I've used LinkedIn Jobs myself, and I can tell you it's a game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. Because when you're building a business, you're dealing with permits, you're dealing with contractors, you're also dealing with codes and regulations. It's hard for you to realize, oh, we're opening it up next week, and I ain't hired a staff, right? I know from experience how important it is to make the right hire decisions. Having access to insights like what skills a candidate has and how they're connected to your network, that helps you feel confident when you pull that trigger. Hire smarter this year. Find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, moving along here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. I'm Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast. I may have surprised some of y'all today because I actually said Trent Balky was right. If you think back, though, towards the end of the season, I said Doug Peterson. I heard Doug the way he was talking. I was like, you know what? That Trent really does have an argument to get rid of this dude, man. He really, really does. And it just came down to me that, you know, two things can be right at once. Like, Doug probably did need to get fired. Trent probably need to get fired, which is why I said I didn't want Shad to have to make a decision. I said just get rid of everybody, right? Because Shad and Trent hired Doug Peterson in the first place. And I'm not going to be one of those 2020 guys. Those hindsight is 2020. I was okay with Doug Peterson being hired. In fact, I was like, hey, man, this is going to give him some competence. This is going to give him a dude that comes from a good coaching tree with Andy Reid. And for 2 years, it wasn't that bad. The first year was really, really good. And it's always about perspective. It's like where you come from, right? So that first year seemed like they were a Super Bowl contender by the end of the season because, well, they won a whole bunch of games down the stretch and then won a playoff game that they were losing 27-0. And then they played pretty well in Kansas City, right? Down one score with the ball and a fumble happened. Yeah. So 2 turnovers in the last 7-8 minutes of that game. And, you know, that game goes a little bit different. The Chiefs have a way. The Chiefs do that with a lot of people. But still, for the Jaguars to do that after the first – look, they were a year away from having the first overall pick in the draft, man. That was a pretty big deal. And even back then, nobody was talking about Trayvon isn't as good as Hutchinson because the Jaguars are in the playoffs and the Lions weren't. Sometimes that quick success, though, is fool's gold, and it turns out that's exactly what it was because the Jaguars had the same record the next year, but it felt more disappointing because your expectations were raised. And your expectations in 2024 were higher, too, because of the statements of Shad Khan saying that this is the most talented team in the history of the Jaguars, which turned out to be false. And it also was disappointing because it was 2 straight 9-win seasons. The Jaguars had only had 2 consecutive winning seasons, I believe, one time in their history prior to that. Trevor Lawrence was coming into it. They did go out and do some things in free agency. They focused on bringing in leaders and guys from proven teams like Gabe Davis from Buffalo and Eric Armstead from the 49ers and Darnell Savage from Green Bay. You brought guys that came in from playoff teams, right? They changed the defensive coaching staff. That turned out to be a little bit of a disaster for a bunch of reasons. I found out some reasons here recently that there are a lot of players that thought that, well, it was confirmed. I saw the report and then it was confirmed to me there are a lot of players that had a little bit of a disconnect with Ryan Nielsen. And that actually caught me by surprise because I talked to people from Nielsen's previous stop in Atlanta and New Orleans, and they raved about him, how the players loved him so much. So we'll see how this all pans out and turns out, depending on the coach that they hire. But I looked up in the NFC and I saw that 3 of the 4 teams that are left in the playoffs in the NFC were not even there a year ago. In fact, Washington picked 3rd overall, and they made it all the way to the playoffs with coaching changes. Now, that doesn't mean that that's sustainable for them in the future moving forward. But, I kind of look at it and I see Jaden Daniels and I go, oh, it's more than sustainable, right? Whether they sustain it is up to them, but they still got to play the games and you still got to have luck when it comes to injuries. But, yeah, sure. In the AFC, yeah, the Jaguars can do a little bit of damage. Now, in the AFC is a little bit different because I think the 4 teams that are in the AFC are the exact same 4 teams that were there a year ago. And it's a little bit different. A lot more proven and steady quarterback play. When you start listing the best quarterbacks in the league, like most of them are in the conference that the Jaguars play, which is why it's imperative for me that Trevor Lawrence plays better. But Trevor Lawrence can play better without having going in a cave and finding God's gift to play callers. I think he can play better just by finding the coach that knows how to push the buttons, knows how to change the attitude and the whole temperature of the room, if you will, with Jacksonville. Can they do it? Sure. We've seen them do it in the past. They've actually done it before 2 years ago, but it's going to take a lot. It's going to take the things that I talked about earlier. When coaches take over teams, they take over the team, and they don't have this mentality that I got to bring my own guys in. If they do, most of them don't say it publicly. Coaches take over a team. Everybody that's under contract is their guy until that dude proves that he can't be their guy, and then they'll go get somebody else. In our minds, they aren't married to the players because they didn't pick them. Kind of like Parcells says that if you're going to cook, you need to let us pick the groceries. So we give a little bit of a mulligan to new coaches when they take over because those aren't his people. But in order for this to work, some of these guys absolutely have to be folks that turn it all around. It's hard to look at Detroit and you look at all of their players, and most of them are people that were picked in the last 3 or 4 years. But they're just like on any roster, there are some mainstays. There are guys that were already there. There are guys, and I believe that there's an opportunity here. You're not going to be able to turn this roster over completely and then make the playoffs next year, right? I don't think that you can do that. I do believe that you have to get some production out of guys that you're already committed to financially, and I named a lot of them here today. And hopefully, as we continue the coaching search, they hire someone that can do that. Robert Saleh's interview has been completed. Like him a lot too. He had been here before. I had a chance to talk to Robert when he was here before on 1 or 2 occasions. I like Robert Saleh. I like what he represents, and I like how he teaches guys how to get after it. Something I want you to ponder when you think about these coaching staffs. And I'm going to tell you the answer because I asked my co-host on Locked On NFL, David Harrison, about it. I said, why do people think that all of the offensive coordinator candidates have to be young when the defensive candidates can be old guys who used to be head coaches or old guys that have been around for forever? And he made a very good point. Offensive guys are thought to be innovative, whereas once that innovation starts and you realize it's cyclical, usually it takes an old guy to say, oh, we've seen that before. We need to stop this and we need to stop that. That's what's happened this year in the NFL is more of a running league. If you look at the teams that are still there, whether they have a great quarterback or not, they're doing it with running the football, limiting possessions. They're doing it with physicality, and they're doing it with defense. That's something from the Bill Parcells, but Bill Belichick, Joe Gibbs, Buddy Ryan, Mike Ditka. That's from that era. So defensive coaches like Vic Fangio and Steve Spagnuolo, who are older than me, and I'm 55, I think they're older than me anyway, don't get mad, but those guys are having success. But then everybody turns around, and if you want to hire a Josh McDaniels or a Chip Kelly, they'll look at you sideways. I don't mind hiring a dude like that, or Frank Reich, somebody who failed as a head coach. That means that maybe he can be a good offensive coordinator, and maybe it means ain't nobody checking for him trying to hire him because they've already had their shot, and nobody's going to give him another shot. I know those are names that y'all don't want to hear, like Mike McCarthy. If he doesn't get a head coaching job, you wouldn't want Mike McCarthy to be your offensive coordinator. I know a lot of people will say no because they'll say the game passed them by. How did the game pass them by and the game hasn't passed by Andy Reid? How did the game pass them by and the game hasn't passed by guys like Fangio that I've mentioned? The game ain't passed the Spagnuolo by. The game hasn't passed them by. How come the game is all of a sudden not passed by defensive coordinators, but it has passed by offensive coordinators? That's a weird thing to think about. But I hope what we can do is just get the right leader in the building and then find a good play caller that has a system, that has other guys, maybe the quarterback's coach, maybe the receivers coach, guys that you can start elevating the same way the teams that everybody keeps poaching for their assistants keep elevating those players. All right, man, here's what you do. Tune in to Locked On NFL each and every day. It's a double shot of espresso early in the morning with Tyler Rowland. And then I come through the barbershop each and every day around 2 o'clock. And we give you the best show we can with all of the biggest stories from around the National Football League with the help of local experts who know the teams better than anybody else, just like I hope I know the team here in town better than anybody else. I know y'all do, and I thank you and I appreciate you for joining Locked On NFL and making the show what it is. Tune in, man. If there's any coaching news, we'll let you know. But for today, we'll see you tomorrow here on Locked On NFL.